How can you do all that needs done in life and still pursue your desire to learn French or the guitar or grow a plant or make art? You can't put a fiddle under your pillow and wake up playing it, though how cool would that be? But one thing we can do, no matter how chaotic and overwhelming life can be, is know that every tiny small motion in the direction of those endeavors really do matter. And not only that, they add up over time with great momentum. Join me, Fain, as I interview painters and gardeners, designers and musicians, photographers and cooks, creative livers of any kind who have somehow, in the middle of it all, continued on their creative paths, no matter what. This is Fain House Radio, and I'm so glad you're here.
Hey, I'm Jen Swearington, and I have had many creative endeavors over my life. I pretty much knew when I was 12 years old I wanted to be an artist and pursued that ever since. And so here we are 30 some years later, and I am making art in lots of different ways. I made my living for many years sewing, making jenny threads, handmade apparel and accessories that I would make everything from start to finish in my studio, from dyeing and printing the fabrics to sewing construction, all the way to finishing and tagging and going to craft fairs and selling to galleries. So that's been my main creative endeavor that is going on 19 years, and I am actively phasing that out. In the meantime, I've always drawn since I was little and went to art school for undergrad, was all kinds of fine art, but with a degree in sculpture. Then I got into textiles at Savannah College of Art and Design for graduate school and wound up with my MFA in fibers. I have done everything from quilts and paintings. Now I'm doing mixed media. I did many works on little playing cards for a few years. And now I'm getting back into sculpture, which is weird because I wound up with a degree in sculpture because I just couldn't pick a major, and that was one to kind of finish. But I do think I've always found creativity across media, and there's always something to do and always a broad way to use your experience to figure something out and make it work. The latest work has started with Carousel books, and Fain, I took a Coptic stitch class from you at Bookworks, which must have been, I think 2006. But I've also always been interested. I took a bookmaking class in undergrad, and books and book structures are coming back into my work. I feel pretty done with clothing, and books are just a fascinating structure that I'm really building sculptures based on.
I always am watching what you're doing because I feel like you're playing as you go. So you've had the clothing and textiles as this common thread, but in the back of your booth, you'd have a quilt that you had drawn and painted on. And then also the books you're talking about have all these layers, and then drawing and painting are a part of that also. So it's like an awareness of book structure, or it wouldn't work, but then you're adding all these things to the pages and doing pieces that are in small, like in little suitcases, and you can open them up, and it's so fun. I definitely recommend everybody check out what you're working on. In honor of mentioning a few things that haven't been profession based, I know you have a love for bees and beekeeping. Is that part of your story?
Yeah, my Grandpa Hernig in Indiana was a beekeeper for close to 60 years. And I grew up a half a mile from Grandpa's house, and he had bees all over the county. And he had a couple hives near my house, and we had a swimming pool, an above ground pool, and the bees would come drink the water, and that's where we would get stung because we would step on them or stick our hand when we were swimming and hit the edge. And you go to my grandparents' house and there's it was just super bee kitsch, okay? Honey themed everything. And they actually subdivided their land later and named it Honey Acres. And my grandpa sold the honey off his porch and was also an educator where he went to my school, went to many schools, and did the outreach and education about honeybees and being a beekeeper. And I was never really curious until later on. And I have some of his books and some of his equipment. He passed a few years back. I would ask him for advice, and he'd say, you need to find somebody local where you live. So right now I have 4 hives. I've had them consistently since 2015. I had them in my house in Asheville, and I moved them here with me. I moved 2 hives in my car with my veil on and drove the 4 hours down, and a few would get out, but I kept the windows closed. We don't want them to escape because then they're lost on the highway. They're just really fascinating. I do have this family history, and then it's just one of those subjects that the more you learn, the more fascinating they are. And also for many years as an artist and a business person, and having debt or whatever, I worked very hard and was a studio rat for many years, just working, sewing, driving, selling, all that. And then the last few years to like, oh, wow, an artist with a hobby, like to have a hobby, to have something else besides your work. I think for artists, we're kind of conditioned to your work is everything. And it is very important, and it's very much who I am. But it's also, I've been learning Spanish, and I've been keeping the bees and traveling to Latin America when I can. So having some other interest besides your work, but it also does lend to it and, of course, get you away from it.
Helps you have a break. And also, I mean, you're clearly like very curious, lifelong learner person. Yes. You're talking about when you were 12, you had that strong, clear feeling that not everyone has at 12 years old, that this is kind of the direction you wanted to go. Was that because of how your family was in terms of creativity, or what do you think was part of that process for you?
I grew up in a very industrious family of, we didn't have a lot of money, but my mom would garden, my dad would work on the cars, and they would build things. And my Aunt Janice had a little sewing company called the Pillow Lady out of her husband, my Uncle Kelly's locksmith shop in town. And and my mom's one of 8 kids. I have a lot of aunts and uncles in Indiana who are all very industrious people doing something cool. My Aunt Kelly Hernig is still an artist and was a big influencer and mentor to me. And when I was 12, I was in 7th grade and applied to be in all year art instead of having to do band or choir, which I am not musical, but art I could draw. I drew a picture of my dad sitting there. So I showed the art teacher. And so I had a direction, is take the all year art class. And it was just so fun. And then my Aunt Kelly and Uncle John, they don't have kids. They spoiled all their nieces and nephews. And I was the oldest, and I was an artist like Aunt Kelly. So my family really said, okay, you want to do this? Here you go. I had a little closet in the den where I had my Aunt Kelly's old drawing table. So I was very encouraged, and I felt like I was good at it, and I loved it. And I even see my aunts and uncles when I go home to Indiana, and they still have prints that they frame that in 8th grade or high school that I did a drawing, and we did printmaking and did a plate, and it's just like a bicycle leaning against a fence that I'm sure copied from some photograph, and they all still have it hanging in their house, different. So my family was very supportive of that. I think in Indiana, where I grew up, it's not somewhere where it's common to be an artist. I was very lucky to have my Aunt Kelly to show me, hey, you can grow up and get married and not have to have kids and be an artist and travel and do cool stuff. And I've kind of modeled my lifestyle after Aunt Kelly. And she's still wonderful and supportive and amazing and an incredible artist. So I was able to have that and see that as an example, where later, then you've got to, get through school and then figure out how to be an artist and how to make a living and all that. And that, of course, took a lot of time. And then I did live in Asheville for almost 20 years. And of course, being in Asheville, if your work is at all related to craft and you get into the Southern Highland Guild, and the resources are there to help you figure out how to make it. So I think, growing up with a family that was supportive and having a great mentor of an artist, and then moving eventually somewhere where I could actually make a living, a viable living. Although now, like you said, being a learner and wanting to learn new things and different things, and it sucks being bored. So, I'm not afraid of work. I'm not afraid of hard work. I think boredom is harder. And there's plenty of times where we need to knock out something or sew inventory, make clothes, fill orders, all that. and we do our work. And I think a big challenge is staying inspired and staying engaged with that. And that ebbs and flows too.
The difference between making your living from it versus as a hobby. And when you're making your living from it, it's accepting that a big part of it is all the admin and also production, constant production, like a never ending production. Because the reality is, like, if you look at how much you have to make and then how much you'd have to sell by month to actually pay your bills, wow, it's a reality check. And it's a lot. Hearing the story of how you were supported in your family and your extended family, not just your parents, because I think that it can remind all of us that any young person in our lives, we could be supportive that way. So we don't have to be related to them. Maybe we're a teacher, or maybe we're just somebody in the community who could really see and support. And the questions we're asking them, you know how for teenagers, they're like, oh, they're going to ask me what I'm going to major in. And they always ask the same stuff and let me go hide. But what if you ask things that were more directly related to some of this other kind of brightness that you saw in them, and pay attention to that instead of this undertone of, are you going to be a banker or a lawyer kind of thing?
Yeah. My Aunt Mary asked me, I think right around then, is if I wanted to go into occupational therapy. Of course, I was like, I don't even know what that is. And no, she's very practical. She's very practical. It's still like a wonderful practical side of, I have about 6 aunts who are all wonderful in different ways. And I remember her asking me that when I was like in, I don't know, 8th grade, like you said, early teen years, 9th grade. And I do think, because I tend to be more introverted with younger people, but I think too, just trying to be a positive example where I'm not really going to chase down a teenager and, ask what they want to do. But I love playing show and tell with my stuff and what I'm doing, because often I'm doing something I'm excited about. So I think just trying to share some positivity and some enthusiasm and some engagement of what I'm doing so they can see it is possible.
Another part of what you've done in your work is be a teacher. You're a maker and a teacher.
Yeah.
I have the impression, tell me if I'm wrong, that you like teaching also. It's totally different, of course. And you're talking about balancing your introverted self with what that means. I know people who've taken class from you and had such a blast. What do you like about each of those? Because it's almost like it's different parts of you, to teach.
Yeah, totally. I've taught as long as I've been making art professionally. And years ago, I was a resident artist at Aramont School of Craft in Tennessee. Yeah, so I was there 20 years ago, and I'm going back to teach for a week this summer, sewing and a little surface design thrown in with it. And I think teaching has just come along with making art. If you want to engage with the public, if you want to share your skills, if you want to get your work out there and be part of a community. I'll admit too, I'm a little burnt out on teaching as well. And it's not because of the teaching. I like teaching. It's the stuff that I've taught so many times. It's the burnout on the techniques, on shibori and screen printing. I've done 20 years now. I mean, I know I'm good at being able to convey how to do something and to lead and to help people, create something they didn't think they could. And I know they can. And I'm going to help you get there, and we're going to do this. Problem solving, figuring out things. And I like teaching in small doses. Workshops are good. Up to a week or 2 is good. Going to the folk school or Aramont or Penland, that sort of thing, is good. And then I'm ready to go hide afterwards. I was a professor at UNC Asheville, at SCAD, at Haywood, and I found those longer stints, where you have students for 4 months and they may want to be there, they may not want to be there. And I just found that's too much to fight with. I mean, not so much fight, but they may be there, they may not want to be there, and they may want to do the work or not, and they may blame you for I couldn't handle the college drama. And I've tended to take things a little more personally than you should. And so I think, knowing you're going to go teach for a week, you're not grading anybody, you can help them get as much or as little out of it is good. So been part of my work. I necessarily never was like, oh, I want to be a teacher, but yeah, I have that skill, and I do enjoy doing it when I'm there. And when I'm done, I'm ready to go home and hide out. But I have met some really incredible artists and people and friends. You know, you never know who you're going to have in your class and how that's going to go. And I've also learned just to try to maintain some perspective. So it's interesting. It's another part of it. I wouldn't say it's the core of what I do, but I'm always glad to do it.
You know, you're acknowledging two things. One is, I think it's a good reminder if you're in a place of designing your days or designing your job or whatever, to
Mhm.
just acknowledge this isn't really my strength and how I can be happiest, you know, and then you can modify it. So it didn't mean stop teaching. It meant you like
Mhm.
to teach in a different kind of way. So it's like a way of accepting yourself. And the other part is that when you're a student learning and an adult learning, a lot of the time, there's an
Mhm.
emotional side to it. You know, you're finally, maybe if it's a whole week away, you're finally away. You did everything you could to get there. It's like so much planning. And
Mhm.
maybe there's challenging parts, or maybe you're crying because you're just so happy to have a break, or who knows? Or you have like insecurity, you know, you're subconsciously or consciously comparing with your neighbor, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And it is part of being a teacher that's so different from creating an artwork. You're juggling the feeling in the room and helping
Mhm.
everybody hopefully be happy with what's happening and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I've learned as an artist, you've got to do a lot of different things and kind of whatever the next gig that comes up, if it's something you're willing to do. And teaching has been part of that, but I think overall it's been a good experience. And yeah, I'm still gonna do it. I'm excited to like teach the new things I've been working on. Carousel books, book structures, and not so much screen printing. Shibori, just because I've taught those so many times that that part's not as exciting anymore. And you're like, oh yeah, I know. Yes, I pulled a perfect print. I'm better because I've just, done a million. So yeah, so it's important to mix things up. And just that part of it of you've got to do different things in order to make a living. And what that might be lends to a well-roundedness anyway.
That's the practical side. So just being an artist or making work or, you know, or musician, there is always a
Mhm.
practical side.
Mhm.
You have to keep your books and get a schedule and do all your things. And also you're clearly ready for these multiple income venues of what
Yeah.
form and shape could it be? How many ways
Uh-huh.
could you take what you already do? It's not being
Right.
scattered. You're just taking what you do and using it in all
Mhm.
different forms. And I mean, down to you have shows in galleries and all kinds of
Yes.
stuff. Part of what you love is traveling. And of
Yeah.
course, it makes sense that when we travel, we get refreshed, we have new world, you know, all of that. I'm
Mhm.
curious, you have this drawing sketchbook side of yourself.
Mhm.
Do you
Mhm.
feel like the drawing and travel kind of go together? And what
Yeah.
place does that way of free flow, letting things out, absorbing new, what part
Mhm.
does that play in your art, would you say?
Well, I say that I draw to take the world in because I sit and I look and I draw. I draw from observation because I don't know what things look like in my head. I also write to get things out. And often when I write, it either gets glued closed or torn up more to get something out that nobody really needs to read. It's not good. It's just blah, like get out yuckiness or get out thoughts or insecurities or whatever processing that I need to. But I've always drawn, and I since undergrad I've always kept a sketchbook, and then I got away from drawing. It's just something I've done since I was little, and I've always felt like I've been pretty good at it. And my relationship with it has changed because all the sewing, I would screen print my drawings on the fabric and have that product. But it took doing some art residencies and traveling abroad a couple years ago, starting in 2018, it's already 4 years ago, to get drawing back into my practice of every day. And during this time, my marriage ended, it fell apart and ended. And my husband had gone to hike the Appalachian Trail and was gone for 5 months. And I had to deal with some very difficult stuff, but I also had a plane ticket to Bulgaria for a month. So all that time was a bit heightened because I was married 17 years and going through some big change and grief in that. But also I was just, Bulgaria came along because there's an artist residency website called Resartis, Resartis. And there's just all kinds of international art residencies on there. My husband and I had gone to Nicaragua, some different countries, and we're tourists for 2 weeks. And I felt like I'm not getting much out of it. You know, you go town to town and you eat in restaurants and you hike trails and it felt very superficial to me. I wanted a deeper experience and got this residency. I had to pay for my lodging. It was very cheap, like $500 for the month to be there and get myself there. But I went to Munich and Vienna and Prague on the way. And my rule was I had to draw every single day. Years and years ago, I took a class at Aramont when I was a resident on pop-up books taught by Carol Barton. And I had this little maquette, this little structure for a carousel book. I brought it with me. I had sketchbook, I had paper. I was just like, I need to do something I can travel with. I only travel with a carry-on little suitcase. But I drew every day, and then I started compiling those into the layers to make carousel books because they fold completely flat. And it was all imagery that I saw walking around or drawing. I was in Sofia, the capital city, for a month, and just walk around and draw and then start putting those imagery together to create new layered scenes, new dioramas. I did some pieces that are more personal, but I don't like doing overtly personal. But there are stories in there, but it gave me a reason to start drawing every day. And I use the sketchbooks. I am kind of documenting my life experience. I consider myself a documentarian or a journalist on my one little life here. I went to Japan a few years ago and just wrote about the food and the tabi socks and the toilet, how I struggle with trying to navigate where I'm illiterate in another country. So I'm having a pretty interesting life experience and documenting what I'm going through and what I see. So travel is definitely going to a new place. For me, exploration is inspiration. Sitting in my house, I love my house, but I'm not going to see anything new. So just going outside and wandering around. A lot of it doesn't come right out of my head. It's not generated out of there. I need to bring in all the bits and then start compiling them into something. And in the meantime, yeah, I am compiling my sketchbooks. I probably have 30 in a cabinet here that I think someday would make a really fascinating book to pull all those. And I am kind of documenting this one little life experience of one human.
I love how you talk about it. I'm realizing that not everybody might know what a carousel book is. How would you describe that?
Can I grab one?
Sure, yeah.
I know we're on radio video, but here, let me grab one.
Yep. Anybody who watches the video will get a chance to see a real live carousel book.
Oh, okay. So this is the book. It's a closed structure, but it is layers of accordion folds. This one has 4 layers. And this is actually my very first one I did. And this kind of the end of it, where that's me in my backpack looking at, let me see, this was the window that was going to be where my studio was going to be for the next month in Bulgaria, in Sofia. And these are different things that I saw in my travels along the way. So these are kind of castles and locks on the bridge from being in Prague. Then this is nature. This all just the stuff I was seeing. It's kind of a lion and a church and Sacred Heart. And then this is kind of me at the end going, what's next? Or where am I going? So a carousel book, it's called this because it goes also completely in the round. It's a really cool structure. So it's just layers of V's, of mountain folds and accordion folds that then folds flat. So I had the little maquette that then just, so now I've done, 20 some of these different things. And now I'm building them into bigger structures. And also this is so crazy because I've had this big challenge now because I did just go to Argentina. I've been back about 3 weeks. Before I left, I did a paper cut. Actually, it's right here. So I was in North Charleston, and there's a riverfront park, and they have a national outdoor sculpture competition. And I was inspired by it because I thought I could make something really cool. So I did this little paper cut, and I did some Photoshop to make it look like it's on a pedestal, and I applied, and lo and behold, they selected my piece. Yeah, so and now I have 2 weeks left, and it has been a crazy steep learning curve because this is the next maquette. I'm having it fabricated out of sheet metal. And
Wow.
I've never done that before. And I've had a 3-week freak out trying to figure out how to have this done. So you'll see, this is my structure. It's also based on accordion fold. It's basically a Z with 2 V's and 2 V's is the structure. And this is all going to be laser cut out of steel. And it's being fabricated right now. I'm knocking on wood because every minute I look up my phone, I pray and go, please, no bad news. Please don't tell me the files are messed up. Please don't tell me it's not going to cut it, because this is in the works and it's been a challenge. So this is like, I first did this fun little paper cut. Oh, cute. And then it got picked. And now I'm like, had to go into Photoshop and build it again to scale, and each of these panels to be fabricated.
It's almost like you put yourself out there, and then when you're picked, it's exciting. And then also the backside of that is, oh, now this is reality in a medium that you have never worked in before. I don't know. It just makes me think about when we're not quite ready, but we are ready, but you haven't done it yet before. So it's stressful, but almost maybe a good kind. And then you get spit out the other end, and then you've made this piece you never would have made, but you were game. You're like totally game.
Well, I'll be honest, I wasn't real impressed what was out there. And I was a little cocky and was like, well, I'm going to do something cool, which I did. But yeah, the learning curve of coming back and calling fabricators, trying to figure out what they want. But yeah, there's nothing like a deadline, and there is some award money. It's covering about half, and then I'm fronting the rest. But I'm looking at it as an investment in learning how to do this whole other medium. I know one of your questions you had asked about like struggles. I think as an artist and a maker, it's hard to let go of just letting somebody else do something, or learning the steps of how to have somebody else do something. I've had in-house assistants. I've had people sewing with me and for me for many years. So it's a whole new skill set to learn how to farm something out. And no, I don't have a plasma cutter. No, I don't have a welder. I can't just, believe me, I've been scheming. If this totally falls apart, am I gonna go rent a plasma cutter and try to figure out how to cut some sheet metal? I might. I was in tears the other day as one guy totally bailed and said, these files are crappy and we can't work with you. It's a challenge, but it's one of those things. Yeah, if you don't have a reason to figure it out, you won't figure it out. I've been talking about this for years. Oh, wouldn't it be cool to have some paper cut stuff done out of metal? So this is the new learning curve. And this is the new challenge, is that unless you want to do things the same way the rest of your life, you got to figure out how to do something different.
But it's still fun because it's still you. It still comes from this thread that you have, which is, you were just talking about the travel and then the sketching, and the sketches became these layered accordion folds that you can like look into. You have the sculpture side of yourself. You have the bees and nature side of yourself. And
this has honeycomb. Yeah, some of these motifs that worked in are part of my other work. And so that's also a thing, is going from being a maker to a designer to how do I get this to another person so they can make it, they can fabricate it. And all those questions of going, yeah, it's still my work. I still thought of it and designed it and did all the work to facilitate them being able to construct it.
Yeah.
And I do have a friend, my friend Merrick, who's going to help me with the actual welding. because it got so cost prohibitive of just having the panels cut. And then to add them welding it would just be that much more. So I'll still have my hand in welding the panels together and installing it. It is a challenge to make you go, I got to figure this out. The other day I was just in tears because like one guy was like, these files aren't right. And I don't know what to tell you. But the files were fine for a different guy. It's being made. And it's funny, I have a degree in sculpture. And honestly, sculpture is big, 3D, useless stuff. Like, why am I creating this thing to go into the world? Oh, yeah, because I wanted to see if I could do it.
Yep. And people will get to visually enjoy it and see.
Right. That's why it's interesting to go away from sculpture and come back to it. I was most inspired when I was over at the Riverfront Park is they have some submarine models that are probably just 5 feet long, a metal submarine on a stand, like a scale model. But when you're looking at it, the water's behind it. You can kind of play with your eyes with it, like sinking and floating in the water. And that's what I found most interesting about is looking past something to the landscape, through it, and the piece being part of the larger environment. So it's not just one thing, you sit there and you look at it, you look through, and it helps, hopefully just enhances what people are getting out of that space and that park and going, oh, now it looks like these waves in the sky and the water is all overlapping.
I like thinking of all of your play with the Carousel book as being a stepstone. You didn't know it yet, but a kind of stepstone to this whole different medium, whole different scale. You have recently announced the ending of your business after almost 20 years. And so many people were attached to your clothing and looking for you at every show and everything. Yeah. Was one of the reasons to kind of make that transition in honor of this freedom to do ideas like this, different, more conceptual, more stuff without being hemmed in by production?
Absolutely. I think doing production does get repetitive. And like I said, I'm not afraid of work. I will sit there and crank out what I need to and make good clothing, good work. And I am proud of what I've made. It's just getting to be a time where I'm not getting anything out of it creatively. And that's where, too, what is very important, why I do want to sell the business instead of just sell off the equipment, because I have the patterns, I have all that I've built, and I'd really just love to put it in somebody else's hands because I feel like I've done everything with it that I am capable of. But I would love to, see what somebody else can do with it next. And I think that's part of a legacy business versus your own is I have all these patterns, I have these styles, I have these prints, and I have the equipment that somebody could give new life to it. And I want to see where it goes. I wish I learned earlier how to scale it while I could. It's a whole other skill set and a whole other strategy. And that's what business people do. And that's something that didn't come naturally for me to scale beyond myself besides having some help. But I would love to put it in somebody's hands who can take it somewhere else. And then, I'd rather spend my time figuring something out because I can see the sculpture could become larger public art or something in airports or that sort of thing. And I think too, for a while, I was like, oh, do I want to just make fine art to, become an artist with work in the museum? And I was actually just up in Boston at the Museum of Fine Arts. I was like, museums are wonderful, but I'd like to have my work where more people would interact with it, to where it would be part of people's lives in a different way. So I think sticking a sculpture in a park is a little more exciting. I mean, I'd be thrilled if a museum called me right now and wanted a piece, but I would be thrilled. But it is interesting to go from making a product and making something people wear to making more fine art and saying, well, what is the value in this? And what direction does it want to go in? Or where could it go? Because I was just at the Atlanta airport and there's this incredible installation that you ride the people mover not the plane train, but ride the little flat escalator. And this artist built this sculptural ceiling with lights, and then it's all animal sounds, and it's kind of like nature, and it must go for 500 feet, and then I just ride it back. And it's one of these hallways between the terminals. I love the idea of art being everywhere, so that you're stuck in an airport, and I had some time, I just kept riding that back and forth and listening to the bird sounds and the frog sounds. And that could be really exciting. So yeah, to develop this work into bigger projects. And this is the first way of figuring out, how do you do that?
I like how you have this feeling of, like you're saying, you're not afraid to work, that kind of thing. There's a grit that's part of that process, because it's not all romance, like the brush on the canvas,
Oh, no, we know better than that.
There's a lot of discomfort.
That romanticism.
Yeah, there's discomfort. There's unknowing. Sometimes money flows in. Sometimes it's like not at all. And there's some grit to be up for this adventure as a profession. Also, people are listening, aren't all professional artists or anything like that. There's also a grit that you get credit for fighting for keeping your bees, or for travel with your family, or having a sketchbook and that kind of thing. Littler things that are like folded in to, your life.
Yeah. Well, and I'm also a runner, and I have to run every other day. I don't run every day, but it's a very, very important part of my life to just go outside and blow off some, I call blowing out the carbon, like when you have to have a car that's got to pass emissions and blow out that yuck. It's like that, but also running and finding things and seeing things. But yeah, of having a well-rounded life and being an artist, but like you said, the grit of knowing how hard you have to work in order to make it happen. But yeah, I do think it's kind of a nice luxury later in life. I mean, I'm in my 40s, but I know through my 20s and 30s, I was, very tunnel vision and very focused, almost to the point of, definitely workaholic and that. But I'm glad I did what I did then, because now I can coast a little more. But yeah, there's a lot to making art besides, this is just, just sit here. And I mean, I think you're giving me a lot of credit saying play, where to me it's more just like figuring things out, problem solving. But play being that, it's paper, it's fabric. I can do whatever I want. Who cares? If we mess it up, who cares? Like, I was married to a firefighter for many years, and he'd come home with stories, and I'd be like, man, they're the people dealing with the real stuff. I'm just a decorator in the world. I'm making life prettier. And I get that. And it's always funny, like altering something for a customer. The neckline, like, okay. And I'll just take it and chop them. What'd you do? And I'm like, it's just fabric, and I know what I'm doing. I didn't cut you. It's fine. I mean, we have our comfort with our materials and practice, and it's just fabric. It's just paper.
The playfulness in that is sort of going for it. It's fine. What if we put this here? What if we take this away? What if we just mess it up a little bit? That kind of thing. Yeah, it's more, playing with that, with materials, and knowing it's not, it doesn't cost you any blood. You might have answered this already in a certain way, but what are you most excited about in the next year?
I did just have like a really great last month, being able to go to Argentina, and I got to run in Patagonia for a week. And I have this sculpture on the horizon, and that is like right now, please get built, please get built, please get built, please let me install it. My deadline is April 11th. And it'll be within a few days of that. So that's what's exciting about this year. I am excited. I hope I can transition Jenny threads and sewing and all that to a new person. It needs fresh energy. It needs fresh blood, and it's all there. I actually just took a little job as a paddle guide here and did my first training run yesterday, where I'm going to be doing stand-up paddleboard guide work. When I don't have Jenny threads anymore, I need something and just to be able to go get out on the water. And that's totally new. I did it yesterday and I got blown way off where I'm supposed to be. And it's really hard to move all these big stand-up paddle boards for people. And I'm definitely out of my element with that, but it's not insurmountable. So yeah, it's weird to have a job. I haven't had one. Well, for somebody else. So that's exciting. I just miss my bees because they used to be at my own house. And now I go every week or two and I'm the maintenance man. So I want to do more with my bees and continue to make my work in a new, interesting way. And I want to do things that are exciting. And I was just able to travel again. I'll travel again soon. Have new projects. And I've been applying to different things like this sculpture competition just to send out these kind of like shooting arrows out in different directions and see what's going to stick, what's going to land, what's going to lead to something new. Because right now I don't know what that is. I'm excited to have the time where I've really said, this is the time to change gears. This is my time. I held what I needed to together for a long time with my marriage and staying in Asheville and all that. And now I'm here and it's a competition. And then they had a portrait drawing contest and I totally applied. And that's in like 3 weeks. And I'm going to be quick draw and drawing portraits of people. And we'll see. And so I'm just putting myself out there. What sounds fun? What sounds interesting? And can I make make enough of a living in the meantime to keep doing it? And I'm hoping this year will give me some idea of what this direction is.
Yeah.
But right now it's like, just try different stuff, see what happens, see if you bomb, but I do get really scared of failing, but I get very excited. It'll be fun. And again, just drawing. So I don't have to rescue anybody out of a burning building. I just go draw.
Yeah.
And we'll see. I don't know what.
Once again, you won't be bored. And it also makes me think about what people say. I don't know who said it first, but that clarity comes with action. Mm-hmm. And so if you're in motion and you're trying and out there being engaged in it all, then something's going to rise to the surface. And then you're like, ting, that's it.
Exactly.
What is filling up your inspiration cup these days?
Well, so I did just go run this morning by the lighthouse, which is here off Folly Beach, and there were dolphins. I hung out with dolphins this morning. That was so cool. That was very inspiring. And I am working on a piece right now based on that whole area. You come in by the ocean and make a left and follow back along the marsh. And this is the river where water's coming out, and the birds, the marsh, the water, the light. It's my favorite place to go to outside right now. And this morning I was emotional and dolphins and running and crying, and it was fun. And then also I was just in Buenos Aires earlier this month. The Recoleta Cemetery rocked my world. It blew my mind. So Recoleta is a fancy neighborhood in Buenos Aires. And in the middle of it is a 13-acre cemetery of big family tombs that probably goes back a couple hundred years with sculptures, just figures, sculptures, wrought iron. Whenever I travel, I do always go to the cemetery wherever I'm at. I'm curious how people memorialize their loved ones and how different that is in different cultures. I've been to Mexico a couple times for Day of the Dead, Dia de los Muertos. And then I had 2 days by myself to wander in the cemetery and draw and decompress and just draw. And when it was raining, I went into the church and drew the saints. And also in Buenos Aires, there's a lot of high rises that are really stark. They're beige. They're kind of ugly. I was in this beautiful treasure trove of sculpture and then around town, these buildings that are kind of boring, but then the shadow of one building on the other building is really beautiful, and the light and how something can be kind of big and stark and not so beautiful, but then at a certain angle, it's absolutely sublime. Yeah, just going outside, looking around, and you'll find really fascinating things. I'm just such a huge fan of all the wonders in this world. And I mean, I'm not a big city person. It was kind of like, well, that's where the airport puts, that's where the plane lands till you go to the next thing. I'm really inspired by going outside and looking around and looking at the light and being somewhere for a minute or an hour or a day or a month and spending that time to sit and look. And drawing does that for me because I have to sit there. As you're sitting there drawing, it gives you some purpose and it gives you something to do. I have a very hard time just sitting at a restaurant with people and going, I don't drink anymore. I quit drinking a couple of years ago. I'm like, well, this is boring to just sit here. And that's another reason to always have something to do with my hands. But it forces you to slow down and be present. I found it calms me too. And having that, like you said, clarity with action and having some action to really take in what I'm experiencing. So that's what it does for me. And then when I get back in the studio, more of like, okay, now I'm going to put the wrought iron and here's the building and start composing that into a scene. And this little thing that's just, it's 4 sheets together that I had it in my suitcase with my little cutting mat. And I said, while I'm here, I'm going to do this little piece. It's important to make art while I'm still there because it's part of that experience. And this, I was super jazzed to have that time to myself and make art about this experience that kind of captures, that time I was there.
Yeah. And also I like that you had a cutting mat and you had the papers and things with you, because that's a really cool example of how to take a studio feeling with you, like feeding your own inspiration, basically, just with a few little simple things.
I have I think it's a 12 by 18 cutting mat that fits in the carry-on. And for me too, it was important to get away from a whole big production studio. Like I wasn't going to take a sewing machine and a bunch of screens to print. And I really did want to get away from all the equipment intensity of it, of having, I have 6 sewing machines downstairs. To get away from that and take the creativity with you without needing all the stuff. A pen and a knife and a few little things in a little kit, you can do a lot without it being a whole bunch of stuff you got to take with you.
Do you have any last words of encouragement for anyone out there just trying the best they can every day to be folding creativity into their lives? It doesn't have to be profession. It could be at home. And, I imagine people listening. I don't know everyone who's listening. I have no idea. Hello, listeners, but I imagine that some are. I know part of what inspired this podcast project for me was when I had 2 tiny little kids and a really intense job. And my creative self was struggling. So these are stories and interviews in honor of reminding all of us, like, it's all in everybody. It's going to happen. We go in phases and all that kind of stuff.
Well, I'm of that same ilk. Like if I'm not busy, I get depressed. Like, oh, if I'm not busy enough, I must be doing something wrong. But I mean, we live on this incredible planet where there's just so many incredible things. I think number one, to try to be open to what is out in front of you. And go outside, go for a little walk. I mean, I have found sitting in the studio, racking my brain doesn't bring much fruition. And I think just because I'm an artist doesn't mean I'm a genius and in my head are all these things that just got to get out. We have to go find what is interesting and inspired to us. For me, often it's just going outside and just looking. I mean, I'm so much of like, just look around but get a little sketchbook or get a little piece of paper and cut yourself some slack and know that it, like you said, it does ebb and flow. Sometimes we feel super pumped and jamming and other times it feels like a wasteland. So also too, if I need a creative break, if it's not jamming, I go to the library. I love the library because you can go find all kinds of things on whatever, and it's free, and it's one of the most amazing democratic institutions we have. Just go to the library and sit in a cozy chair and find an amazing, a book. And the great thing about the library is you can get a bunch of books, and if you don't like them, take them back. They didn't cost you anything, just return them. So I do think it's important to kind of keep taking something in that gives you inspiration. And for me, it is going outside, but there's a lot of people might be like, well, I go outside and it's a parking lot, or so just trying to introduce a little more that gives you some inspiration, and just like look at pretty pictures. Or I was telling a story that was like a joke from Calvin and Hobbes, and I was like, man, I used to love Calvin and Hobbes. And I went to the library and got 2 Calvin and Hobbes books. And in the evening, I would sit here and Sam will be making dinner, and I would just giggle to Calvin and Hobbes books. And they haven't necessarily led to anything in my work, except I just giggled for every night for a week. And so I think we have wonderful resources. Yeah, I'm the first one who gets upset if I don't have an idea. It must be because I'm a failure and a loser and I'll never make good work again. And I have that freak out. And then the next morning I drink coffee, is very important. And I try again.
I love everything you're saying because it's all in our reach. A cup of coffee is in our reach. Going outside is in our reach. And even if we're in the city, like you're talking about, you can look, there's the shadows or a library, or it's all there. And even if it's 10 minutes away because you have a newborn baby or something like that, that is still worth doing. And it just helps everything. But I really appreciate you admitting the freakouts that you have and the feelings that you've had about that, like totally part of the process. And it doesn't mean that anything's wrong with us, Yeah,
this has all been an exercise in, okay, good. You had a good cry. Now what are you going to do next? It's okay to allow yourself some frustration, but after a while, you got to quit moping. Like I do allow myself some time to mope in whatever it is, a few hours. And then I'm like, okay, all right, let's just sit and do something, or wash the dishes, or do something. But we do continue to process whatever we're going through, and there are things within reach. I mean, when I was at SCAD in Savannah and I was totally burned out on all the historic stuff, I would go under the bridge and ride my bike around and just look at all the industrial stuff because it was different. I would go to an antique mall just to walk around and look at weird old stuff. I mean, yeah, I could write a book on cheapo living too. I don't know. My iPhone is it has no memory. It's really old. And so for me, I don't find much inspiration on the screen. I do watch Netflix and unwind in the evening. I think there's enough screen time for all of us to try to get away from the screens.
So your next book will be Inspiration on the Cheap.
There we go. I've been living that. I don't know. I'm not a shopper. I don't have to buy a bunch of stuff, and I get more fun out of making something. Martha Stewart said this years ago. She's like, with her magazine, she said there are people who look at Martha Stewart magazine and go, what can I buy? And then there's people like us who look and go, oh, what can I make? Actually, last night on Netflix, I watched a thing about black holes and all these scientists and Stephen Hawking discovering how to turn the world into a giant Earth-sized telescope, take a photo of a black hole. And I fell asleep and I woke back up and I was like, black holes are, I don't know. Black holes are cool, whatever, but I don't really think any of us humans are going to interface with a black hole in the next 100 million years. So I'm more interested in what's going on Earth around me right now. And it's pretty freaking spectacular.
If you would like to be in touch, email me at afainhouse@gmail.com. If you would like to watch these interviews in video form and are curious about the happenings of my little business called Fain House, where I paint and make art prints and gift cards from my watercolor originals, I'd love for you to sign up for my email list. If this all sounds fun to you, go to your web browser and type bit.ly/Fainhouse to sign up.
This is not a weekly newsletter, but rather a list of folks who are interested in hearing from me time to time. You can find this link, as well as links for each person I interview, in the show notes of each episode.
Thanks so much to Jen for joining us today, and thanks so much to you for listening. I'm Annie Fain Barrelon, and I'll leave you with a quote for the day. Creativity makes a leap, then looks to see where it is. Mason Cooley.